Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much to the conference organizers for the invitation. Very happy to be here. I'm Sarah Carter. I'm a research associate at the World Resources Institute, working mainly on Global Forest Watch, but also on some other land covers as well. Global land cover mapping and accuracy assessment of those maps is another of my tasks. So I'm actually based in WRI Europe, which is in the Netherlands, and we have an office in London. Most people are familiar with WRI as being a US-based organization, but we do have a presence in Europe. So it's really nice to be involved in some European initiatives as well. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with Global Forest Watch, the aim is that we make open, timely and transparent data available to people everywhere in the world who can monitor forests anywhere in the world, and that we can do this in a timely manner. And the idea is to provide some independent data which is available to a number of stakeholders and can be related to evolving policy needs, so used for policy needs, other use cases as well, and it's provided independently and is something which is also comparable across countries. So it's a global platform, and it means that we use global data, which is following the same definitions in different countries. So it's slightly different to using independently produced national data sets. So I think it is very relevant for Europe and for European policies. We can definitely see information using Global Forest Watch data and tools on status and changes to Europe's forests. There are some gaps which we're looking to address. The last presentation focused on near real-time data, and that's something we're really working on and will be online in the next few months for Europe, which will allow this kind of early action or early warning, as some people like to call it, on forest disturbances which are maybe unplanned or illegal. What I will say is with remote sensing data, there's often no silver bullet, no one data set which can really meet any monitoring need, and often you need to combine several data sets. In fact, nearly always you need to combine several data sets to really gather the information and the insights which are required to answer policy and user questions. Ground data, I would say, is a prerequisite for calibration, validation of data sets, but also of checking of results. So the EUDR is one example of that, where due diligence assessments, the Commission encourages the use of remote sensing data, but I think it's always essential to have that ground check element where potential non-compliance events have been recorded. We have GFW tools that can facilitate that. So this is maybe what people are familiar with when they think of Global Forest Watch. It's a global map, and it shows a 20-year time series of tree cover loss information. When Global Forest Watch came online 10 years ago, this was revolutionary, and I think it's still really important that we have this annually updated data set, which shows us basically where tree cover is being lost everywhere in the world. It's based on Landsat data, so it's 30-meter resolution, so every 30-meter pixel of the world's surface, we can monitor and see what's happening to tree cover in that area. And this particular data set is produced by the University of Maryland, but we do work with a number of partners, although the majority of the key data sets, let's say on Global Forest Watch, are produced by our partners in Maryland. I mentioned that often multiple data sets are required to get the full picture of what's happening in Europe's forests or in any forests. And we have a number of what we call contextual data sets which are available, which can really help to answer the questions which users might have about data, to say, tree cover loss, okay, we see it's happening, but is it something that we're worried about? Tree cover loss, quite critically, can include any disturbances of the tree cover, so it could be something natural, it could be something that's legally allowed and is maybe less interesting to people, but it could be a disturbance which is clearly not planned and is within, for example, a protected area or a community land area, or a high biodiversity site, and all those contextual data are available on Global Forest Watch, or it's within a concession, but we think it's exceeding what's been agreed. We can see that it's within a concession area. Those are also available for some countries on Global Forest Watch. So I mentioned that it's tree cover data that we mainly use as the basis for Global Forest Watch, and this means that it's not really a forest definition that we're following, and tree cover loss does not necessarily mean deforestation either. And I think this schematic just gives a bit of an overview of what we capture with the satellite. So essentially, satellite can pick up biophysical information from the Earth's surface. So that's the presence or absence of trees. Often they pick up on structure, canopy cover, height, those kind of metrics which we can interpret from the satellite data. But we can't determine with a raw satellite data product whether it's a plantation or it's a palm oil plantation or an orchard, which would be considered agriculture under the FAO. And of course, we see the absence of tree cover in areas where it's clear-cut, and the FAO and national forest definitions would consider that still forest. So I think it's very important that people are aware that the data will differ from national estimates, and that's okay. We can often explain this because of these differences in the definition. The Global Forest Watch is global by nature, but I think regional differences are something which have to be considered when we're considering the data as well. So in Europe, we can see that the drivers of tree cover loss, so every year we update the tree cover data. We also update information on what the potential drivers of the tree cover loss are. So in Europe, you can see it's mainly forestry activities. There's a tiny bit of urban conversion maybe, but the majority is really these. Some forest fires as well, which we consider as a driver. So going from the European level, the regional level, to the national level, we also provide information which is kind of readily packaged, very useful for those non-technical stakeholders who are interested in data but maybe don't have GIS skills and so on. So we provide information in terms of statistics. This is an example of what we call the dashboard in Global Forest Watch for Finland. So some of the information that you can see is the amount of tree cover loss. You can also adjust some metrics in there. For example, you can select a canopy cover threshold or a tree cover height threshold with which to see loss. So that can help people to align with national forest definitions or other areas that they're interested in. And the same data is available on 3 NUTS levels, so these administrative levels, so the country, the state or province, and then I think district or county or whatever the country definition is. I think it's maybe district. It's a good equivalent for Hungary for the NUTS 2 level. So the statistics are easily available. Anyone can gather them for any country in any subnational level. And we also provide these contextual layers, so you could look at tree cover loss within natural forests or so on. Actually, the natural forest data that we have, we currently don't surface it for Europe. We're in the process of updating to a new version. And the old version, we see some flaws in it, which were being corrected specifically for Europe. So that's something which is coming soon. So I mentioned the Global Forest Watch map and dashboard. I think that's the main way that people interact with Global Forest Watch data. But we also have Forest Watcher, which is a mobile phone app. It's mainly used for people who are acting on the near real-time information. So basically these deforestation or forest disturbance alerts, people can download information and use it offline to assist in forest patrols and that kind of thing. And then we also have Global Forest Watch Pro. I think it's important to mention in the context of the EUDR. This is basically using the data and methods from Global Forest Watch, but it's a platform which enables portfolios of sourcing locations, so it's mainly used by commodity suppliers, and they can monitor compliance with non-conversion commitments, voluntary commitments, required commitments as well, related to deforestation and so on. So this has led to millions of hectares in forests being monitored and millions of people interacting with the website. And I think this has really democratized forest data, allowing anyone, civil society, the media, all kinds of people with interest in the forest to be able to monitor it. And these, what's showing here are some statistics about in a year who's interacting with the website and what kind of areas they're monitoring. And we know that because people can upload polygons into the system and extract information, so we can track where they're uploading polygons and which areas they're monitoring. So what can we see from Global Forest Watch data? Well, I'm going to start with some data which actually isn't yet on Global Forest Watch, but it's an updated version of essentially the tree cover loss and tree cover information which we have on Global Forest Watch, and this is just for Europe. Perhaps people are familiar with the publication, again, from the University of Maryland. And what they found is that tall forests are actually losing their area in Europe. So this means lower biomass, lower carbon stored, and potentially disturbance in these old growth forests, which tend to be tall. So this is very concerning. We can also see that, and this is now using the annual tree cover loss data on Global Forest Watch, we saw a big jump. There's about a third increase in tree cover loss between 2022 and 2023. We saw this big increase in Hungary, and actually we contacted Zoltán and asked for some insights into what's happening there. That's a relatively large jump, especially in Europe. And we were able to link it to the increase in wood energy, something which has been discussed a lot here. So I think it's really important for us that we get these statistics and we can discuss with local people who have local knowledge, and we can really derive useful insights from the data. Climate change is another key driver of change in Europe's forests, and again, this is from our latest tree cover loss release, which we do every year. So looking at tree cover loss in 2023 in Greece, we can see that there's a huge jump in forest fires. This can be linked to climate change and also an increase in these kind of flammable non-native species like eucalyptus. Although overall in Europe, forest fires are not a major driver of change. We only saw 6% of all tree cover loss in the EU was actually due to forest fires. And then another thing that we can see, this is information from the dashboard looking at one state in Germany. We saw a big hike in tree cover loss. One of the biggest jumps in Germany, I think it was the biggest increase in Germany, especially looking at the difference between 2022 and 23. And we were able to look into some reports from that state in Germany, which identified that the insect disturbances were a massive issue during 2023. So we were able to link our global data with German state-level reports, which also saw these high rates of disturbances. And again, climate change is something that's driving these changes. So beyond the information on Global Forest Watch, we're also working to identify information which can be useful in the context of some of these forest monitoring or nature restoration laws, which we've discussed. And we identified that the information on Global Forest Watch tends to focus on areas of tree cover change rather than the kind of quality of forests, which I think is important in the European context, where often losses are replaced by gains. And also, I think to have a fair comparison of how Europe's forests are doing, you have to consider both losses and gains, which we could do with this database the data set from the University of Maryland, which shows annual tree cover height and was able to show us the loss of these tall forests. So we worked with one of the Horizon projects, Forest Navigator project, who are building a multi-layered forest geodatabase. It's essentially harmonized geotiffs which cover a number of forest variables, and we summarized these by the admin levels, the 3 admin levels which I discussed, and we also summarized them within 2 strata, which is protected and natural. So we were able to provide this data. If you're interested, you can email me for it, but the list of indicators is on the right, and they align with some of the things which are mentioned in the nature restoration law. For example, one of the targets is to increase forest connectivity, and connectivity is essentially the inverse of fragmentation. Another one is to increase the proportion of uneven age stands, and we have information on forest age, which is available in this database, so can help us towards understanding that target. And basically this is what it looks like. I've put together some information on the forest age here for Hungary. So it's worth noting that the legends are quite different here. We have a very small proportion of forests which are over 100 years old, and a large proportion of forests which are young. But you can see a distribution there, and I'm sure local knowledge will be able to explain what's going on there. I cannot. And then I also produced some maps for forests above 50 years, just to have a look in all forests. So we see that percentage of old forests or older 50 years plus forests in all forests is lower than within natural and protected areas. So areas that are both natural, we use a global natural data set for that from the Science Based Target Initiative, and for protected areas, it's the World Database of Protected Areas. So in both natural and protected areas, we see much higher proportion of older forests. We can also look on the next subnational level, loss and gain. This is within protected areas, so what you might expect, relatively low areas of potential disturbance. Remember, tree cover loss and gain can be both natural and anthropogenic in this instance, but when you look outside of protected areas, you see large areas of change, and we can assume most of this is not natural. But of course, knowledge on the district level can be interesting, and maybe you can identify some interesting patterns from this data. So this is the kind of data I was talking about, which is available outside of the Global Forest Watch platform, but it's essentially shapefiles that people can access and interact with if they're interested in. So just to go quickly on the EUDR, I'll mainly talk about the degradation part. We have a couple of blogs out on Global Forest Watch which explain how Global Forest Watch data can be useful in the context of the regulation for setting baselines, identifying primary and naturally regenerating forests, tracking conversion, and identifying planted forests, plantations, and so on. But it's incredibly complex in the context of the regulation. Degradation, is possible when you have conversion of primary forests to either planted or plantation forests, and naturally regenerating forests to plantation forests. But what you can see here is what you see from the satellite image, which is essentially the third column along, where the wood removal is happening, is that's going to be picked up from the satellite image. We're going to see a disturbance, but it's not necessarily degradation. So it just really highlights the fact that in addition to satellite data, or maybe multiple satellite data sets are needed, or maybe ground validation is needed, but it's a really complex and challenging task to see whether we can identify whether degradation has occurred or not. On the kind of base map aspect of it, we're working with the JRC to produce essentially a version of their forest base map, which they've produced for the EUDR, but which is disaggregated into forest types. So we would be able to use that for EUDR. And we're also working with a number of other researchers to create some alternative versions of that map. So we're attacking it from many angles. We want to make sure we have the best available base map we can for degradation monitoring as part of the EUDR. So coming back to near real-time information, this is also useful for EUDR. Where disturbances are happening, it may indicate that non-compliance is occurring. At the moment, we have information in near real time available in the tropics, and it enables this quick action in response to unplanned or maybe illegal changes. But we don't have this yet for Europe, and I'll just show you, this is an example of what the data look like. This is in Colombia, and basically every time the satellite flies over, the algorithm processes the information and determines whether or not a disturbance has taken place. And then we can put it up on our website, and basically we also have some information on how confident that disturbance is. So the more times the satellite goes over and detects a disturbance, the more confident we are that it's not an error or an anomaly, and we show that information on the website as well. And this is logging roads in the Congo Basin. So it's very usable. People often interact with this data using the mobile phone app, as I mentioned, but you can very clearly see this is a logging road and it's selective logging happening in the database. This is actually 10-meter data, and it's essentially every week updated on the website. So this is the work that we're doing with Wageningen University in the Netherlands. It's radar data, so we don't have any delays because of cloud cover, which is an issue with optical data. And hopefully in early 2025, we'll have information in Europe available on the website. And here's just some examples. We've got in Romania and in Sweden. I don't know exactly where that is. It's cut off. Yeah, in northern Sweden. At the same time, we're working with the University of Maryland. So Wageningen are using the European Space Agency Sentinel data. University of Maryland are doing a similar effort. They're using harmonized Landsat and Sentinel data, so information from NASA and ESA, which is combined, and they're tracking vegetation fraction. So that means not just in forests, but in any vegetation, every 2 to 4 days, so a bit of a higher revisit time. And this presents the potential to monitor also other woody lands, which may be relevant for future versions of the EUDR. And this will also be available on Global Forest Watch by the end of the year for Europe. So this is an example of some of the disturbance which you can see in Hungary. We will have some thresholds, again, like I said, to indicate confidence on Global Forest Watch. So what you see here may be some noise as well. It's not processed as it would be on Global Forest Watch, but just to give an idea about what the level of detail which the data can show. This is 30-meter at the moment because that's the resolution of HLS, but in future HLS will probably be available in 10-meter resolution, so will enable us to see smaller disturbances. So a lot of potential, very exciting information that's hopefully going to be available by the end of the year on Global Forest Watch for Europe. So some key takeaways. I think the value of independent wall-to-wall mapping of forests is just enormous. It allows this kind of comparable across countries data to be available. It also means that when countries are providing national data, we can compare it to the global data sets to see is it in the right ballpark. We can explore whether the differences can be explained or not. We can also serve a variety of EU monitoring needs. I mentioned a few already, and I think the data, it's provided in a number of different formats. So for those technical users, we have, they can access the raw data, the TIFF files if they want. For less technical users, they can access graphs which summarize the data, so should be more actionable for the media and so on. I think the combination of satellite-derived information with ground data or with very high-resolution satellite data is key. We do have planet data, which is very 5-meter resolution on Global Forest Watcher, unfortunately just for the tropics. But I think we should be pushing towards freely available high-resolution data for Europe, which can be used as kind of validation of this information we're deriving from satellite data. I think local knowledge is really essential. So, like I mentioned, every year we get global data set of tree cover loss all over the world, and then it's always a scramble. We want to get the data out as soon as possible to identify some useful stories which we can communicate on. We tend to focus on the tropics. The big story last year was Brazil, which actually, according to our data, saw a reduction in deforestation. But I think in future I would love to focus a bit more on Europe. We managed to get some stories out like the one in Hungary, which I think was really useful. So if anyone knows of big changes which they're expecting us to see in the 2024 data, I'd love to hear about it, especially if there's some literature we could cite. I'm looking for real evidence which we can show alongside the data. That would be really useful. So basically, the 2024 data will come out in the spring of 2025. So before then would be great. And we're always evolving. We're working with new partners to fill critical information gaps. We work with mainly the University of Maryland and Wageningen University, but we're open to working with other data providers. And basically, we're happy to take the best and latest available data and make it available to people as they want to use it. And that's it for now. Thank you.